When you're playing FPS games, being able to switch between weapons is a pretty basic mechanic. On the Discord, a lot of people have been asking me to do a video on weapon switching, and so that's exactly what I'm going to do in this video. For this video, we're going to be starting off with a basic FPS controller like the kind that we built in this video. But if you don't feel like watching the video, then open up your web browser and go to www.github.com/garbageYT/Godot basic FPS controller. This is going to take you to one of my GitHub repositories where I have a first-person character controller pre-made for you that you can import into your game and use to follow along with this tutorial. So once you've got a character controller ready to go, and I should stress that you don't have to use the character controller that I provide in my GitHub, the basic concepts that I'm going to teach in this video should apply to any kind of first-person character controller. But anyways, once we've got that done, the first thing that we want to do is create some new inputs. For this tutorial, we're going to be showing you how to switch weapons either by pressing the number keys on the top of your keyboard or by scrolling your scroll wheel. To do that, go to Project and Project Settings, and in the General tab, scroll down on the left here until you see Physics. Click on Common, and under Physics FPS, make sure you have it set to 240. Next, go to Input Map, and in the Action box, write Weapon 1 and click Add, Weapon 2, Weapon 3. Then for each of the weapons, click on the plus icon on the right, select Key, and press the key that you want to assign to the weapon. In this case, I'm going to use the number keys. So 1 for Weapon 1, 2 for Weapon 2, and 3 for Weapon 3. Next, we're going to create some guns for our character to hold onto so that we can demonstrate switching between them. Press this plus button to create a new scene. Press this plus button, and we're going to add a mesh instance node. I'm going to rename it to Gun 1. Under Mesh, we're going to click on the empty box, give it a new cube mesh, and then I'm going to mess with the size and shape of the cube until I get something that looks kind of like a gun. Now that we have our gun, and I know that it looks basic, but that really doesn't matter, we're going to add some very basic functionality to the gun just for testing purposes. Click on Gun 1 and add a new script and name it whatever you want. Now that we're in the script, we're going to write func shoot open close parentheses. If input.isAction just press fire. Oh, and before I forget, let's go back to Project and Project Settings, and in the Input Map tab, let's create a new action called Fire. I'm going to click on the plus button, and we're going to select mouse button, and we're going to select left button from the pull down menu. Once we're done with that, we'll go back to the script and we'll write print gun 1 fired. So in this shoot function that we just created, if we press the fire button, then it's going to print gun 1 fired in the console. Alright, so I've gone ahead and created two more guns that are essentially exactly the same as this gun right here. The only differences being that they are different colors and sizes. And if you go into the scripts for each one, you'll see that instead of gun 1, you have gun 2, and you have gun 3 for each respective gun. Next, we're going to go back to our character controller scene, and under head, we're going to right click it. We're going to add a child node, and we're going to add a spatial node. I'm going to go ahead and rename it to hand. Click on hand and move it forward a little bit and move it down and to the right so it's in a position that kind of resembles where a hand should be. And the reason why we're calling it hand is because this is the location where we're going to be holding all of our guns. Then we're going to click on hand. We're going to click on the chain link button. We're going to click on scene gun 1 here, and we're going to click open. And so now we have gun 1 as a child of our hand. Then we're going to click on hand again, click on the chain link again. This time we're going to select gun 2 and add it. And then we'll click on hand a third time, and we're going to add gun 3. So this looks a little weird right now, but don't worry, it's going to make sense soon, I promise. Also, if you want, you can click on the camera, you can click on the preview window, you can click on hand, and under the transform tab, you can adjust the translation a bit and adjust the position of the gun until it's in a position that you like. This is a completely optional step. You don't have to do this. It's just for visual appeal. So now let's get to the part where we actually make the guns switch. Go back to your character controller scene, click on the script, and now we're going to add a few variables. Under this line, we're going to write onReady var gun1 equals $head/hand/gun1. Then we're going to copy this line and we're going to paste it 2 more times. For this one, we're going to change gun 1 to gun 2, and for this one, we'll change it to gun 3. So now we have a reference in our code to each of the 3 guns that we created. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make it so that we can switch our guns by pressing the number keys on the top of our keyboard. To do that, Under this chunk of code right here, we're going to create a new function. Func weapon select open close parentheses. Next, we're going to go back up to our variables, and we're going to create a new variable. Var current weapon equals 1. And so this is going to keep track of which weapon we currently have active. So back here in weapon select, we're going to write if input.isAction just press weapon 1, current weapon equals 1. Elif input.isAction just press weapon 2, current weapon equals 2. Elif input.isAction just press weapon 3, current weapon equals 3. So if we press the weapon 1 button, in this case it's the number 1 on my keyboard, then the current weapon will be set to 1. If instead you press the weapon 2 button, which is number 2, then the current weapon will be set to 2. And if you press weapon 3, then it'll be set to weapon 3. Okay, so now that we've got all of this written down, you might be wondering, okay, so how are we going to turn this into switching weapons? Well, if you go back to any of our gun scenes, and you click on the mesh instance node, on the right in the properties, you'll see a tab called visibility. If you open it, you'll see a little option called visible, and currently it's set to on. However, if you uncheck this button, then it'll make the gun invisible. This is going to be very useful. If we go back to our player controller scene, you'll remember that we added all 3 of our guns kind of stacked on top of each other right here, and it looks really weird. But once we're done with all of our coding, you're not going to be seeing all 3 guns at the same time. And that's because we're going to make it so that whenever you select a certain weapon by pressing one of the number keys 1 through 3, we're going to make it so that when you select a gun, the other 2 guns that are stacked on top of it are going to become invisible, so you can't see them and you only see the gun that you selected. And then if you decide to select a different weapon, then that current weapon that you have will be made invisible and will make the gun that you want to see visible. So in a sense, you're not really switching the weapons because you're always carrying all 3 weapons, but you'll only be able to see one gun at a time. To do that, we're going to go back into the script, and under this chunk of code right here, we're going to write if current weapon double equals 1, gun1.visible equals true. Else, gun1.visible equals false. So let's go through the logic here for a second. So if current weapon equals 1, and remember, current weapon is this variable that we defined up here. If the current weapon is 1, then gun1 will be made visible. If current weapon is any other number other than 1, else, gun1 will be made invisible. So now all we have to do is copy this chunk of code and paste it 2 more times. Then we'll just change this number to 2, we'll change this to gun2, change this to gun2, and we'll do the same for this one as well, only this time we change it to 3. So if current weapon is 2, then gun 2 will be visible, otherwise it will be invisible. And the same thing applies for gun 3. So now, in order to make all of this functional, we're going to have to tell the game to actually run this function that we just created. And so in the physics process function, we're going to write weapon select open close parentheses. And so what's happening is that on every single frame, weapon select, this one that we just created here, is running. So now if you run the game, you'll see that we're currently holding the red gun. This is the weapon that you see when you press 1 on the keyboard. However, if you press number 2, then the gun switches to the green gun, and the red gun disappears. And if you press 3, then you get the yellow gun and the green gun disappears. You can switch between all 3 guns just by pressing a different number. So now, let's make it so that you can also switch the weapon by either scrolling up or scrolling down with your mouse's scroll wheel. And in order to do that, we need to go back to the script and add a little more code. Now, you might be tempted to go into project and project settings and go back to the input map and put in an input like a scroll wheel up or scroll wheel down, but that doesn't actually work. And if you think about it, it makes a little bit of sense. When you scroll up or down with your scroll wheel, you're not actually pressing the scroll wheel, you're just turning it. And the input map in Godot only really deals with buttons that you can press. And so we need to come up with a way to make Godot recognize turning the scroll wheel as an input without using the input map. To do this, we're going to go back to the script, and under the input function that we have up here, we're going to add some new code. We're going to write if event is input event mouse button, if event.isPressed, so if a mouse button is interacted with, and if that mouse button is pressed, which again doesn't really make sense because you're not pressing the scroll wheel, but that's just the way it works in Godot. if event.buttonIndex double equals button wheel up, so if we scroll the wheel up, if current weapon is less than 3, current weapon plus equals 1. So if our current weapon variable, if that number is less than 3, then every time we tick the scroll wheel up by 1 unit, we're going to increase current weapon by 1. But once we get up to number 3, we don't want it to go to number 4 when we scroll the wheel up again. And so we'll write else current weapon equals 1. So if current weapon is less than 3, scrolling the wheel up will increase current weapon by 1. But if it is 3, then scrolling up will set current weapon back to 1. That way it'll constantly go 1, 2, 3, and then go back to 1 instead of going to 4. Alright, so now we've got code that takes care of what happens when you scroll the wheel up, but we also need to do the same for when you scroll the wheel down. And that's pretty easy to do. All you have to do is highlight this code right here, copy it, and paste it. And then we just need to make a few small changes. We'll change this if to elif. We'll change button wheel up to button wheel down. And then we need to change this logic here. So instead of if current weapon is less than 3, we'll say that if current weapon is greater than 1, so if current weapon is 3 or 2, then current weapon will be decreased by 1. And if current weapon is 1, then scrolling the wheel down will change current weapon to 3. And so basically this is just the opposite of this. And so if you have more than 3 weapons, like if you have 5 weapons or 8 weapons, it doesn't really matter. All you have to do is change these numbers here to whatever is appropriate for your game. So now when you run the game, scrolling the wheel up will cause you to switch weapons, and scrolling the wheel down will cause you to switch weapons as well. You might be thinking, well, okay, it appears like we're switching weapons, but I know that we're actually holding all 3 guns at the same time. So what happens if we try to shoot the guns? Do all 3 guns go off at once? And so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to address this very issue. If you go back to your gun scenes and you go into the scripts, you'll remember that we created a function called shoot, where if we press the fire button, then it will print in the console gun whatever fired. And it's slightly different for each individual gun so that you know which gun that you just fired. We want to make it so that, for example, if you have gun 1 selected, then it will only print gun 1 fired. And if you have gun 2 selected, then it will only print gun 2 fired, etc. To do that, we're going to go back to our character controller scene. We're going to go into the script, and we're going to go back down to our weapon select function. And under this line of code right here, we're going to write gun 1 shoot. And then under this line right here, we'll write gun 2 shoot. And under this line, gun 3 shoot. So if the current weapon that we've selected is 1, then gun 1 will be visible and we'll be running the shoot function. And if the current weapon is not 1, else, gun 1 will be invisible and it will no longer run this function. And then we've just done the same for gun 2 and gun 3. So now when you run the game, when we have the first gun selected and we press shoot, the console will print gun 1 fired. If we select the second gun and we press the fire button, then it will say gun 2 fired. And if we select the third weapon and we shoot, it will say gun 3 fired. And this is useful because if you switch guns, obviously they're going to have different properties, they're going to deal different types of damage. And so this is just a very simple way of switching between those different properties. And of course, there are a million different ways that you can do weapon switching. In fact, not every single weapon switching system is appropriate for every single game. For example, the system that I just showed you is really best for games that have a fairly limited number of guns in a specific set order. But if your game has a lot of guns, or if you want to have the ability to change which guns are in which order, then you might want to use a different system. Hopefully one day I'll get around to making videos about these different kinds of systems, but in this video I just wanted to show you one very simple and reliable way of switching weapons. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions about anything that I just showed you, feel free to ask in the comments below or in our Discord server. And as always, don't forget to like it, subscribe it, share it, bell it, and comment it. Thank you. Have a nice day.